Hello and welcome to this special edition of Harlan on the Hill. We've got a lot of news to cover. Obviously, broke yesterday the news that James Comey had been fired by President Donald Trump. We are going to wait on the audience to build a little bit here, so bear with us for just a few more minutes. We do, like I said, have a lot to discuss. I'll give you a quick rundown of what I have on the agenda for today's show. We're going to talk about President Barack Obama's do as I say, not as I do policy on global warming. We're going to talk about the new South Korean president saying that he is willing to visit North Korea. We're going to talk about a special visitor to the White House, Henry Kissinger. We're even going to talk about Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, and he had a little funny joke to share with you guys. And then we'll, of course, I'm not going to bury the lead here. We're going to get into the most important topic of the day, Comey's firing. So without further ado, I see that we're starting to have the audience build on the app and on the website, so we'll get right into it. As I teased, President Barack Obama was taking a trip to Milan, and he was going to do that for a special climate summit. And you won't believe the video of his, let's put it up there, the video from his motorcade. Former President Barack Obama, he traveled to Italy this week to make a speech on climate change at the Seed and Chips Global Food and Innovation Summit in the city of Milan. It seems like Obama has taken a page out of Leonardo DiCaprio's book of Do As I Say, Not As I Do, and took a private jet to Milan. Not only that, he took this 14-car motorcade that you see here to get into the city, which included protection and including a helicopter above. That thing burns a lot of CO2. So I'm not sure what President Barack Obama thinks he's doing, but if he's concerned about the environment, there surely is not a way to do it. While in Milan, President Barack Obama also met with the former Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi, who was one of his counterparts when President Obama was in the White House. During his post-presidency vacation, Obama seems to be doing pretty well. He spent weekends in French Polynesia with music mogul David Geffen's 450-foot yacht, and he surely doesn't seem to be frugal either on financially or with the fossil fuels. So that's President President Barack Obama living the high life. Next up, as you probably saw in yesterday's Harlan on the Hill, we had the news that there is a new president of South Korea. This new president, his name is Moon Jae-in, and he is taking a very different stance to his predecessors, and it's one that may be at odds with the United States. South Korea's new liberal president, Moon Jae-in, was sworn in today and vowed to immediately tackle the difficult task of addressing North Korea's advancing nuclear ambitions and soothing tensions from the United States and China. Moon said in his first speech as president that he would begin efforts to defuse security tensions on the Korean Peninsula and negotiate with Washington and Beijing to ease a row over U.S. missile defense system being deployed in South Korea. In a phone call congratulating Moon's election, President Donald Trump agreed with the new South Korean leader to cooperate on North Korea's nuclear issue and invited Moon to visit Washington. Additionally, Moon said in this opening speech, he said that I will urgently try to resolve the security issue with North Korea. He said, quote, if needed, I will fly to Washington. I will go to Beijing, and I will go to Tokyo. And if the conditions are right, I will go to Pyongyang, North Korea. This is a unprecedented thing in recent memory for a South Korean president to say, is that he's willing to fly to North Korea. You have to keep in mind that Kim Jong-un, the dictator there, has killed his own brother. He's killed his own brother. I don't think he would hesitate to murder this liberal president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in. I'm not sure what this guy's thinking. He's clearly a pacifist compared to somebody like President Donald Trump. Obviously, President Donald Trump will defer in many ways to the leader of South Korea on some of these issues as we negotiate with North Korea. But I am a little bit hesitant to say that this guy is going to have a successful career. Moving on. Speaking of foreign policy, President Donald Trump, he had a surprise visit. President Trump invited the press into the Oval Office Wednesday for photos with Henry Kissinger. They took questions, and this guest surprised many of the reporters in attendance. Henry Kissinger is a controversial figure. He's a former Secretary of State and official in both the Nixon and Ford White Houses. Earlier in the morning, Trump met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and we'll get to that later. It was a choice that many people found shocking, given last night's firing FBI Director James Comey, whose bureau is investigating ties between the president's campaign and Russia. You know, all of us know that those ties are somewhat flimsy, but nevertheless, they're investigating it. Asked in the Oval Office meeting with Kissinger about Comey's termination, President Trump said, quote, "He wasn't doing a very good job. Very simple, he wasn't doing a good job." Bloomberg's pool reporter who was in the Oval Office at the time, Jennifer Epstein, said, quote, "With all the comparisons to the Nixon era, Trump brings the press into the Oval Office to see him sitting with a key member of the Nixon administration." You know, the optics are a little funny. You and I are obviously core supporters of President Donald Trump when we hold him accountable when we need to, but and this, even though she's mainstream media, this Bloomberg reporter may have a point that the timing is a little bit questionable to bring in Kissinger then. President Donald Trump did say that, quote, "We're talking about Syria, and I think we're going to do very well with respect to Syria, and things are going to happen that are really, really positive there." He said, quote, "We are going to stop killing, we're going to stop the killing, and we're going to stop the death." As I said previously, Kissinger is a deeply embattled figure. Many advocates and journalists have characterized him over the years as a war criminal. Even the late Christopher Hitchens wrote a scathing book, which has turned into a documentary called The Trial of Henry Kissinger, condemning the former Secretary of State for his actions. Trump said that he's been friends with Kissinger for quite some time. Hillary Clinton, too, spoke of her relationship with Kissinger. I mean, we need to put this into perspective. I do think it's a little bit questionable. As I said previously, the timing isn't ideal. The optics kind of look off. And you have to remember that Kissinger did not have nice things to say about President Donald Trump when he was running, when he was a candidate for office. And so, and he said some glowing things about Hillary Clinton. So this is questionable at best. Perhaps Kissinger was helpful over the course of President Donald Trump's conversations with Sergei Lavrov and the other Russian diplomats that were visiting the White House today. But it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder who's advising Trump and who should be speaking in his ear when things come up that could hurt him. The next thing that I want to talk about here is more on Lavrov. Lavrov was visiting the State Department, and he was meeting with Rex Tillerson. And he, of course, got a ridiculous question from a mainstream media reporter. I think that it was an NBC News reporter, but I'm not 100%. Oh, yeah, it was. Excuse me. I have it in my notes here. It is. It's NBC's Andrea Mitchell. So the Russian top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, was in Washington, D.C. all day today. And he was asked the question about, what did he think about James Comey's dismissal? Andrea Mitchell asked him about it, and here's what he had to say.
On a very broad range of topics. Thank you.
Does the Comey firing cast a shadow over your talk, gentlemen?
What's the quiet?
Yes.
You're kidding. You're kidding.
What about the Russian investigation?
Okay, little Russian humor there.
I don't know if that was a joke or what.
Sure
that's the foreign minister. He looked back at the reporters who were asking about the impact of James Comey's dismissal on this meeting, saying, "You're kidding."
Well,
you're kidding.
He was feigning ignorance, I believe, about that, because then he sort of chortled.
Well, I wanted to leave that clip going long because it just shows how ridiculous Cuomo can be sometimes. And look, I've been on this show, and I would tell him this to his face, that obviously was a joke. So, the Russians are famous for their dry sense of humor, and I think Cuomo is famous for wanting to interpret any sort of comment to be adverse to the President of the United States, as long as it's Trump. So, clearly Lavrov was poking fun at the mass hysteria that's taken place over the course of the last few months since the election as it relates to Russia and their alleged involvement in U.S. diplomatic or political affairs. He's poking fun at how hysterical people like Andrea Mitchell, like people like Cuomo or Anderson Cooper and all of them in the mainstream media can be when discussing Russia. And discussing, what business really, and I'm going to get into a little bit of commentary here, real quick. But why would Andrea Mitchell think that Lavrov would have any take on the dismissal of the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations? The FBI is really, by and large, a domestically focused organization. Obviously, they do have interests abroad as well, but it's not the CIA, right? We're not talking about the dismissal of somebody at the State Department. So, of course, Andrea Mitchell was trying to drum up some sort of controversy there, and he was throwing it back at her. So I kind of like that. I kind of like that Russian sense of humor. He's not going to tolerate it, and he's not going to fall for the trap. But while we're on Comey, I think we should really get into it here, because the mainstream media is continuing to push this story that there was additional requests for funding by the FBI, by Director Comey in the final days of his tenure at the FBI. Days before he was fired, according to the New York Times, James Comey, the former FBI director, was asked by the Justice Department for a significant increase in resources for the Federal Bureau of Investigation into Russia's interference in the presidential election, according to 3 congressional officials who were briefed on their request. Mr. Comey asked for the resources, according to the New York Times, last week, and this is being sourced by Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General who wrote the Justice Department's memo that was used to justify the firing of Mr. Comey this week. Mr. Comey then briefed members of Congress on the meeting in recent days, telling them about his meeting with Mr. Rosenstein, who is the most senior law enforcement official supervising the Russian investigation. Attorney General Jeff Sessions did recuse himself because of his close ties to the Trump campaign and the Trump administration, frankly, because he's the Attorney General, and his undisclosed meetings with the Russian ambassador. The timing of Comey's request is not clear-cut evidence of the firing was related to the Russian investigation, but it is certainly going to fuel bipartisan criticism of President Donald Trump that I think is unfair, but it's going to come. I'm warning you guys. And they're trying to portray this as him meddling in an investigation that had the potential to damage his presidency. Of course, the FBI is declining to comment, but Sarah Flores, the Justice Department spokeswoman, said that, quote, "I have no idea what he asked for in terms of more funding as it relates to the Russian investigation. That was totally false. She refused to elaborate further, but it seems very clear that at least this wasn't something that was well known at the FBI. Perhaps this is something that was taking place behind closed doors between the director, or now the former director of the FBI, and members of Congress. In his briefing with members of Congress, Mr. Comey said that he had been frustrated with the meeting, or with the amount of resources being dedicated to the Russian investigation, according to 2 of the officials, until 2 weeks ago, when Mr. Rosenstein took over as Deputy Attorney General. The investigation was being overseen by Dana Boente, who was the acting deputy and is now the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. So let's break this down. Let's break down exactly what's happening here. I am sure that this is not going to go away. As Dennis said in his walk and talk this morning, Russia is the boogeyman. This is what the Democrats are able to cling on to. They can't win an election. They can't win the White House. They can't win back the state houses. They can't win back the governor's mansions. They can't win back the House of Representatives. They can't win back the Senate. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to obstruct the President of the United States by delegitimizing him. That's what they've been working on since day one. That's what all of this is about with the Russian hoopla. That's why you have people like Andrea Mitchell, the epitome of the mainstream media, standing up and asking the Russian foreign minister while he's visiting the United States Capitol, meeting with the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, a question about James Comey. If she was looking to do her job, she'd ask something about Syria, North Korea, how we're handling ISIS together, because obviously Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump have said that they're willing to work together to face these challenges head on, our common enemies. Ask questions about that. Ask questions about issues of national security. Things that are topical, things that they're actually talking about. They're not talking about Comey. They're not talking about Comey in this meeting between Rex Tillerson and Sergei Lavrov. They're not talking about this in the Oval Office. And if they are, it's, look how, it's probably Lavrov poking fun at how dumb our media is. We're facing existential threats on a global scale. If you were listening to yesterday's Harlan on the Hill, you know just how grave these threats are. And if you missed it, go back and watch it. It's Ryan Morrow and I, and we're breaking down the national security threats and their potential imminent impact on the United States homeland. We're not just talking about conflict abroad anymore. The conflicts could come to the streets of Washington and New York and LA and Topeka, Kansas. If you look at the threat of the EMP, this is a national threat. So, we can keep talking about this nonsense, and I assure you we're going to keep talking about it because the Democrats are making it a story. And I will admit that I don't think that President Donald Trump's doing enough. And this is not his fault, but I don't think that he's doing enough to shut these down. If I were him, I would say, you know what? You want special prosecutor? Fine. We'll give you a special counsel. There's actually something important I'll tell you there. There are no special prosecutors for this kind of investigation anymore. It's a special counsel. It's different, but it just shows you how little Democrats and people in the mainstream media know about this. Anyway, we'll appoint a special counsel to look into this. I've been absolved, as President Donald Trump, I've been absolved on 3 different occasions by the FBI director that I've just fired and by his bureau. I've been absolved of any wrongdoing. But out of an abundance of caution and to make sure that there's no appearance of impropriety, I'll put the special counsel in charge of this, and they'll pursue it. Let's do again. Oh, I'm back. You guys, I'm going to lose you for a second. Bear with me while we go through this audio problem. It will be a matter of seconds. All right, we're back. So sorry about that. We're just having a minor audio technical difficulty. But this is going to be something that they don't let hold of. The Democrats are like a desperate, rabid dog, a starving dog. All right? And what do people do when they're desperate? What do they do when their back is up against the wall? They make irrational, bad decisions. And if the Democrats really cared about what was in the best interest of America, they would stop eroding confidence in our law enforcement at the FBI. They would stop eroding confidence in the due process of law. They would stop eroding confidence in the very democratic institutions that they used to accuse Trump supporters of eroding. They'd wake up and see all of these problems that we face and do something about it. But they're not going to do that. And it's not just the Democrats. It's people like Senator John McCain, who's layering on. He was asked by the Independent Journal Review. He said, they asked Senator John McCain, who should be appointed as the next director of the FBI? He said simply, a select committee. That means, I mean, that's a very pointed accusation of the President of the United States that he's incapable of picking an impartial director of the FBI. And so this is what's going to continue to happen as long as as long as Democrats and Republicans in Congress refuse to talk about the real issues. And it's people like Dick Blumenthal who said, quote, "The priority should be to appoint a special prosecutor. The burden is now on the Deputy Attorney General to appoint this prosecutor now." Chris Murphy echoed that. He's a Democrat from Connecticut. He said, "I haven't given it any thought, but I think that this is something we should consider." Murphy went on to say, "I want somebody who's independent, credible, and who's going to continue this investigation." Bob Corker from Tennessee, a Republican, said, "It's self-evident that whoever is the next person in charge of the FBI has to be beyond reproach and someone that both Republicans and Democrats have a lot of faith in." I agree with that. I do. But I think that if you look at the double standard that's being set forth by the Democrats, and this is what I'm going to talk about now, the double standard. Look at the headlines. We're going to throw up some of the headlines here of some of the things that people in the mainstream media have been saying for a long time about Comey. Chuck Schumer said, "I've lost confidence in the FBI director." Mainstream media outlets including CNN, New York Times, the Boston Globe. Look at there, piling on. These are all in October of last year. Nancy Pelosi. All of these mainstream media outlets, all of these hyper-liberal progressives standing up and saying the FBI director is incapable of leading the FBI. He's incapable of being impartial. He's incapable of holding the mantle. And then something changed. Something changed. But it changed in just the last 24 hours because just last week, Hillary Clinton was at an event, and she blamed her entire loss on Comey, which would seem to indicate that had she won, given Comey's interference in her election, she would have fired him as well. Let's watch Hillary Clinton.
But I was on the way to winning until the combination of Jim Comey's letter on October 28th and Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me but got scared off.
So the leader in exile of the Democratic Party, and that's effectively what she is, the leader in exile of the Democratic Party was just saying that her campaign was sabotaged by this guy, which would mean that there was a dramatic overreach of law enforcement. And I believe that Hillary Clinton's probably right to an extent. I don't think that she lost because of Comey, but I think that she's right that Comey overreached and meddled in an election that law enforcement had no responsibility meddling in. And if you talk to the rank and file at the FBI, according to my sources, according to the people that I've talked to in the green rooms, the judges that I've spoken to, the lawyers I've spoken to, the law enforcement I've spoken to, this was a disgrace. Comey was a disgrace. He was a low point in the history of the FBI. And until 24 hours ago, there was bipartisan consensus that Comey had no business running the FBI. The only people that didn't want him fired were President Barack Obama in October and November of last year, and for some reason, President Donald Trump until yesterday. But listen to people like Chuck Schumer. Now, you saw the headline a minute ago, right? He said he had no confidence in him. If you go and you read more of his quotes and you listen to him, he says, he should be fired or resign. Listen to what Chuck's saying now.
This is part of a deeply troubling pattern from the Trump administration. They fired Sally Yates. They fired Preet Bharara. And now they fired Director Comey, the very man leading the investigation. This does not seem to be a coincidence.
So that's a remarkable change in tune, isn't it? And, they've been complaining for months. We have a tweet here from President Donald Trump, and he said, quote, Dems have been complaining for months and months about Director Comey. Now that he has been fired, they pretend to be aggravated. phony hypocrites. I don't know if President Donald Trump's watching, but that's exactly what I'm saying. Obviously, he's not watching, but we'll send this to you later. And so he has found some defense from Republicans. It's not all doom and gloom from all of the Republican rank and file in the Senate, though for some reason it does seem to be the senators or the Republican senators that take the most issue with him. These guys that are Republicans that are in Congress that are going to have to stand up for re-election in a few years or next year, they're more hesitant. They're more hesitant to attack the president. Mitch McConnell, though, who's the leader of the rank and file Republicans in the Senate, has come to the president's defense. Here he is.
Our Democratic colleagues complaining about the removal of an FBI director whom they themselves repeatedly and sharply criticized, that removal being done by a man, Rod Rosenstein, whom they repeatedly and effusively praised. When Mr. Rosenstein recommended Mr. Comey's removal for many of the very reasons that they consistently complained about. Two investigations are currently ongoing. Today we'll no doubt hear calls for a new investigation, which could only serve to impede the current work being done to not only discover what the Russians may have done, also to let this body and the national security community develop countermeasures and warfighting doctrine to see that it doesn't occur again.
Yeah, so I agree with him on all of those points, except for where he starts pushing back on this independent counsel. Now, maybe some of you will disagree with me, and I'll look in the comments later. Maybe some of you will disagree with me that we should have President Donald Trump put someone else in charge of this investigation that is above reproach, someone that stands above and beyond any appearance of impropriety. You know, maybe, you know, it could be somebody like, well, I'm not going to throw out a name because somebody always pokes holes in it. But it should probably be someone that's not a household name, someone not like Christie or Rudy Giuliani or whoever, right, to lead the FBI. Find somebody boring to lead the FBI. Take somebody that's a rank and file member of the FBI's law enforcement division. Pull them in. I'm willing to try something new. We're all about draining the swamp, right? Somebody like Comey isn't. He's more of a politician. He's more of a prosecutor than he is a member of the FBI. Comey, I always felt like Comey was angling with Hillary Clinton to be the next attorney general, to replace Loretta Lynch. He's a political guy. Get law enforcement in there. They'll clean house. And there's a lot of house cleaning to do. And if you missed it earlier, watch Dennis's walk and talk when he lays out exactly just how rampant the corruption is in Washington. And, you know, I wholeheartedly agree. But the only way that we can resolve this is if we're no longer part of the problem, if we don't at least appear to be part of the problem. And as long as we don't appoint a special prosecutor to fill this role, and as long as we allow there to be political people in positions of leadership at the top of the FBI, we're going to continue to face these allegations. So let's get past it. Let's put impartial people in there. Let's put law enforcement that just care about enforcing the law there. That's how we drain the swamp. Anyway, we covered a lot. I thank you guys for joining this new beta test. We're trying, as you probably have noticed, every single version of this show so far has been different. We've done interviews. We've done headlines like this. We've done straight opinion and monologue. Let's try to save the opinion and monologue for the last 15 minutes of this show. And we're going to continue to iterate. We're going to continue to improve. We'll get these audio problems sorted out. It happens. It's part of the growing pains of building a network. It's part of the growing pains of building a show like this. We'll get past it. So thank you for putting up with it. In the meantime, I know that we covered a lot, so I appreciate you sticking by. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.